Hello dear learners, I'm Christina Georgy and I welcome you to my channel. In this video, we'll discuss Unit 3 of Block 1, that is Verbal and Non-Verbal Communication. Before we move on to this video as such, let me remind you that I've already uploaded a video on Unit 2 of Block 1, that is the Globalization of Communication. If you haven't watched that video, please find the link in the description. Now let's look at the major focus areas of Unit 3. Here in this unit, we study in detail verbal and non-verbal communication. We will look at the two different modes, that is the oral mode and written mode of communication. We'll study the advantages of non-verbal communication. We'll look in detail body language and silence. We'll also learn the semantic and linguistic barriers to communication. Communication is often understood mainly as verbal communication. But my dear learners, the most interesting fact is that around 65% of this communication actually takes place non-verbally. This could refer to facial expressions, tone of voice, movement, appearance, eye contact, gestures, posture, and the like. Nevertheless, studies have proven that 35% of the communication takes place verbally. So what exactly do you mean by verbal communication? It is simply communication through words. This can occur in either of two modes, that is oral or written. Oral communication is more natural and spontaneous, whereas written mode is used in formal situations. Now let's look at the various circumstances in which oral mode is used for communication. Where is the oral mode used? Here are some examples. Suppose there happens a conversation between an officer and his or her personal secretary. This is a case where personal authentication is needed. So this would definitely fall under the category of oral mode of communication. Suppose you are speaking with a visiting delegation. It is a situation where social needs must be met. In that situation, you will choose the oral mode of communication. What about team interaction and brainstorming? Obviously, the answer would be oral mode. That is because in case of team interaction, warmth and personal qualities are called for, whereas in case of brainstorming full ideas, precision is not of vital importance. Certain situations demand maximum understanding. For example, sorting out problems or differences between individuals or between two groups such as administration and students. For that matter, do you think it would be effective writing formal letters or drafting emails? Of course not. For that matter, you will have to resort to the oral mode of communication. Similarly, the talks between management and workers, a chairperson of an organization addressing the staff, decisions or informations that have to be communicated quickly. Moreover, confidential matters are very often addressed via oral mode. Now let's look at the situations where the written mode is used. The written mode of communication is mainly used in cases where information has to be stored and retrieved. For example, in the case of official records. There are some other cases where the reliability and validity of an idea are important, such as decisions taken by a group to be acted upon. In other cases where the verification and authentication of an idea are important, such as a memo from a superior about new accounting practices. Written mode of communication is used in circumstances where objective references are of great importance, such as in research articles. Here, written communication supplements oral communication. One example would be the recording of the minutes of a meeting. Very often we employ the written mode of communication in case of crucial decisions and actions that are to be considered. Communication that is subject to review and reconsideration would definitely employ written communication. We choose this mode in cases where personal presence is not required. Similarly, the communicator needs to extend himself in place and time at times, and then this written mode would be the preferred mode. Now, aren't there circumstances where we use both these modes? Of course. So let's have a look at such situations. So this happens when people are expected to carry home ideas. For example, after a brainstorming session, individuals or teams are asked to develop plans. So they make use of both oral and written modes of communication. Similarly, when follow-up activities are necessary, for example, after a consultative meeting. Circumstances when optimal understanding is needed, for example, a joint communique about international trade agreements, or when the presentation is exploratory, or when audience participation is desired. So under all such circumstances, we make use of both oral and written communication. Now let's focus on non-verbal communication as such. All communication that conveys a message, as we know, need not be verbal. We can convey our feelings through a smile, a frown, or even silence. So non-verbal communication is communication that is not conveyed through words. Symbols, signs, sounds, eye contact and facial expressions, body postures, gestures, physical appearance all come under the category of non-verbal communication. Symbols and signs are used when one-way communication is adequate and effective. Similarly, communication can be made with gestures. Judicial selection of the right mode of communication for a purpose is the crux of effective communication. Moving on to the advantages of non-verbal communication. So let's have a look at the cases of signs, symbols, graphs, charts and flow charts. So in case of sign, a sign has a singular meaning. We all know that. Anybody who sees red light automatically stops the vehicle without conscious thought. The danger sign of a skull instantaneously communicates a warning. The waving of a green or red flag by a railway guard passes on a clear message to the driver and to the people on the platform. But a symbol has multiple meanings, and these meanings shift as per the context. Some symbols are universal and easy to understand. They are popular and convey the same message in almost all cultures. For example, a heart signifies love. A dove with a twig in its beak or a white flag indicates peace or surrender. Similarly, graphs, charts and flow charts also facilitates an easy understanding of a situation. For example, the details of the mode of transport preferred by office goers can be better represented by a graph than as a verbal description. As we know, facial expression is a fundamental contributor to effective communication. Eye contact is one of the most important factors in effective communication. The eyes have been called the windows of the soul. They seem to reflect our nature. A speaker should always, therefore, look at the listeners. Eye contact is very important, my dear learners. You should not, because of your nervousness, look down or look up or gaze out of the windows while you are speaking. When speaking to a group, remember to look at the listeners. Avoid focusing on any part of the group or on an individual in particular. At the same time, remember that looking at someone to establish eye contact is different from staring at them. Staring could be considered offensive.
Dear learners, certain actions can lead to interpretations. For example, what if you maintain eye contact with a person? That would show your keenness to talk, your boldness, your confidence, etc. But at the same time, what if you look away from this person or shift eye contact from this person? That would express disagreement, impatience, loss of interest, or even dishonesty. What if you look down? That would denote shyness or nervousness. Closing the eyes could also mean lack of interest or hostility. What if you raise the eyebrow? It could denote surprise. Same with the case of widening of eyes. Even irregular movement of eyeballs show confusion.
Lip movements can also be subjected to interpretations. Tight lips could show anger or low spirits, whereas biting the lips could mean nervousness. Body language and posture also matter. Just imagine rubbing one's eye in front of someone. That could definitely show boredom. Foot tapping is another gesture that shows impatience. Folded hands resting on table shows attention, whereas leaning slightly forward seated shows interest. Leaning back seated implies a relaxed state, and so on. So moving on to posture. Proper posture is also important for good communication. Dear learners, whenever you are attending an interview or listening to an important lecture, be conscious to bend forward a little, keeping the elbows at the side of the trunk of your body, because this indicates that you are listening attentively. At the same time, you must avoid leaning backwards or swinging the legs. But remember that leaning backwards or swinging the legs can be considered as bad manners. Now let's move on to distance. The physical distance between people is usually a clear indication of the relationship between them. Do you know what the study of human use of space is called? It is called Proximics. Proximics is simply the study of the human use of space within the context of culture. It is associated with the American anthropologist Edward T. Hall, and Hall defined 3 kinds of personal spaces that surround individuals. They are namely intimate space, social and consultative spaces, and public space. So what do you mean by the intimate space? It is the closest bubble of space surrounding a person. Entry into the space is acceptable only for the closest friends and intimates. So to put it in simple words, intimate space would include anybody so close or dear to you. Moving on to social and consultative spaces. These are the spaces in which people feel comfortable conducting routine social interactions with acquaintances as well as strangers. That could be classroom interactions, that could be participation in some meetings, etc. Moving on to public space, it is the area of space beyond which people will perceive interactions as impersonal and relatively anonymous. So the public space would not include anybody so intimate to you. That would consist of even strangers. These days, the social media platforms where people text anonymously can be considered as the public space. Physical distance plays a large role in communication. Gender sensitivity, cultural practices, and individual preferences govern our ideas about how much personal space around us we are comfortable with. Did you know that silence also plays a key role in communication? Yes, indeed, it is a powerful medium of communication. Silence can be effectively used to express protest. It can also provoke introspection in speakers as well as listeners. Remember, silence can be appropriate or inappropriate depending upon the situation. It can be a very good tool in negotiations. Moving on to the barriers to communication. We have already discussed this topic in Unit 1 of Block 1. So let's focus our attention towards semantic and linguistic barriers. Firstly, ambiguity in expression. Every language has words that sound the same but have different meanings. Ambiguity can arise because of such words or expression, whether intentionally or unintentionally. So what do you mean by the term ambiguity? Ambiguity simply means the quality of being open to more than one interpretation. At times, a single word could mean differently as per the context. So have a look at the example provided. They can fish here. This could mean that they are permitted to fish here, or they put fish into cans here. So now let's move on to the next one, that is homophones. Homophones are words that are pronounced similarly but have different meanings. That is, same pronunciation and different meaning. Notable examples include EYE, I, referring to the sense organ, and the pronoun I, referring to a person. Moving on to contextual meaning and speech acts. Language is used to perform a speech act such as giving an order, extending an invitation, and so on. Thus, any sentence for that matter. Let's consider the sentence, Ram, the door is open. And this sentence can be interpreted in at least 5 ways depending on the context. So you can see the 5 different ways on screen. It can be used as an invitation, as a command, as a warning, as a statement of intent, as a dismissal, as an exclamation of surprise, and so on. Ram, close the door would be a command, whereas Ram, come in would be an invitation. Moving on to stress and intonation. Stress can be word stress or sentence stress. So stress on a particular syllable in a word or a word in a sentence can change the meaning drastically. So there are examples given, and this highlighted area is where you actually stress upon, and hence the meaning changes. They stole the fruit from the garden. They stole the fruit from the garden. In these two sentences, you can understand the change in stress can result in change in meaning. Similarly, word shift is also another important aspect. The meaning of a sentence can change when the position of a word is shifted. For example, consider these two sentences. They rang up the parents concerned, which means the parents connected with the issue. Whereas in the second sentence, they rang up the concerned parents, means that the parents who were worried were contacted. Moving on to the next aspect, that is style. Our communication must be made in a style appropriate to the occasion. So there are 2 major styles preferred, that is the formal and the informal one. Using a formal style where the informal one is required may create a comic effect. An informal style where a formal style is expected could be misunderstood as rudeness or lack of etiquette. Remember, the language of a speaker should vary according to the role he is playing. You can see a few examples on screen. The case with a politician or a businessman changes according to the role that is being performed. Moving on to register and jargon. In certain fields, certain words have a special meaning. Have you wondered the word instrument in the field of banking is actually a check or a demand draft? Those not from the field may not know that register or the particular meaning of a word in that field. Similarly, jargon consists of a set of words specific to a department, field, or profession. There is medical jargon, legal jargon, political jargon, sports jargon, and so on. Similar is the case with acronyms. Acronyms are words made by putting together the initial letters of a descriptive name. They are usually understood only within their context. For example, NGO, meaning non-governmental organizations. As we have looked at the 7 major linguistic and semantic barriers to communication, Let's move on to the socio-psychological barriers to communication. So the first and foremost aspect is the attention span of the listener. Remember that however interesting a topic may be, the time spent on it should not exceed the audience patience or attention span. On the phone also, brevity is very essential. Emails, especially the formal email, should be as brief and crisp as possible. This is the very reason why we give specific time limits for each of our sessions as well. Moving on to the next one, laughter, the best medicine. Whether in teaching or talking, a smile always complements the message. Even a difficult concept can be conveyed through humor. Moving on to external disturbances and the wrong medium. Noise from the surroundings or mechanical failures can sabotage communication. This is an aspect to which we all are much familiar. Moving on to personal bias and strong feelings. People who have strong feelings about certain issues or people may be ineffective listeners or readers at times. All such personal bias can affect communication. Their emotion will bias or cloud the message. The next aspect, selectivity or I see only what I want to see attitude. Such an attitude also hinders communication. Same is the case with cynicism and negativity. The cynical and negative person is not at all open to new ideas. So will communication be 100% successful there? Of course not. For good two-way communication, we need an attentive and interested audience. So it is necessary for the communicator to ensure that the topic of the talk is of some relevance to the audience. If they do not perceive any benefit to them, the listeners may soon lose interest. So that's the aspect of perceived benefits. With that, we come to the end of the 7 socio-psychological barriers to communication. Now let's look at the 6 WH words that see you through as a communicator. In a profession or maybe even in life, these words hold the golden key to successful communication. It is very mandatory for us to think, why I am communicating, with whom am I communicating, how should I communicate, what am I communicating, where am I communicating, and when am I communicating? These questions are important because when the place changes, our status too change. We may not be treated the same way as we are treated in our place. Even a good thing said at the wrong time may not attract the others' attention because the time is inconvenient to them or unsuitable to them. So to sum up, we can say that communication can be classified into verbal and non-verbal communication. Verbal communication involves oral and written modes. Non-verbal communication does not use words but gestures. One-way and two-way communication are types of communication. In one-way communication, no response is expected, whereas two-way communication works both ways. We may use the oral mode or written mode as per the occasion. Non-verbal communication cuts across language barriers. Symbols, visuals, posters, silence, eye contact, proximics, body language all form part of non-verbal communication. Silence is also a kind of communication. There are socio-linguistic and socio-psychological barriers to communication. We also looked at the very many question words.
Dear learners, you should have a clear-cut idea regarding the differences between verbal and non-verbal communication. Speaking from the examination point of view, you will have to study the advantages of non-verbal communication, its various components, silence and its role. You should have an idea regarding proximics. You can expect short questions from different topics including body language, silence, and other aspects of non-verbal communication. Barriers to communication would certainly be an essay question. In order to attempt that question, you should be aware of all the semantic and linguistic barriers to communication along with the socio-psychological barriers. It would be great if you could number them and study so that you could remember them easily. I've already uploaded a video regarding the important topics from BEGAE-182. If you haven't watched, please find the link in the description. Dear learners, I've also uploaded a few other videos on BEGAE-182 English communication skills. If interested, you can find the links in the description. If you are interested in learning more about this subject, please find the playlist created on our channel. We'll meet again soon with interesting content. So till then, take care and thanks for watching.